You actually need to be visible to generate new business and to generate new relationships. People need to understand that visibility is their job now. If you're not creating content, if you're not expressing views, I think they will just fall behind.
Where do you think the future lies in terms of visibility for creators?
If we think about what the impact of AI is going to be economically, I think there's just going to be a huge gulf. More people will create, but I think there will be a large proportion of people, they will just fall behind. People who do this as a service, I think, are really going to struggle. Unless you're... What we actually found was that AI created creative was outperforming that was created by a person.
And so where does that leave creatives such as photographers, 3D animators, designers?
I think...
What would you say is your mission in life right now in a professional context?
Is to make expertise visible in a world now that is just full of noise and slop. Great people, great expertise, great experts, great, specialists. They are going unseen. And I feel like we're at a bit of a point where if you're not making visibility your priority, if you're not making it your job to be visible as a leader or as a creative or as a specialist, then the world is going to get very hard for you professionally.
Yeah, I think we share that sentiment. I'm curious why that's important to you, though. Why do you care about making these so-called experts visible?
Because it's their obligation. We need experts. We need experts to solve problems that we have. So if I'm looking, I'm thinking about this as a consumer or as a potential client. If I need a videographer, if I need to see their portfolio ahead of time, I need to do my research. I need to be able to deep dive on work and their viewpoints and their worldviews and, what have they spotted that's really interesting recently? And if I'm just bombarded with absolute crap, like every man and his dog, like trying to be that, then it makes my job in picking a decent specialist, a decent freelancer, or a decent team member, a future team member, very, very hard.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you care though? Is your mission about making the consumer or the buyer's life easier, or is it about championing the experts?
Both. It's both. I mean, if you think of first principles, like experts need to be visible in order to showcase their expertise. But then you think about secondary and tertiary causes. Secondary causes are the consumer is confused. And this is everything we look at when we're doing media buying for brands as well. It's like, don't just think about the product, think about the secondary causes of that product, like i.e. the outcomes. So we're thinking about the consumer's journey being confused, or your potential client's journey being confused, or them just not finding you. Even in your local area, it's some people just like to work with local people, and if they can't find you, you're screwed. So there's secondary causes to the consumer. So the consumer buying journey is a huge secondary cause, but tertiary, third and fourth causes in the chain. You basically you're not going to be able to make money as an expert. Your personal life is going to be affected because your income is affected because you weren't visible. It's all stemming back from visibility. Even if you weren't visible, but you were massively good at what you do, and you'd worked with a few people who could refer you, that's only going to get you so far. You actually need to be visible to generate new business and to generate new relationships.
What do we need to understand about your background and your journey, Paul, to understand why you care so much about this?
Yeah, so I've had a bit of a mixed bag in terms of my journey. I guess going way back, I've always kind of come from a performance background. So whether that be the arts, music, drama, that kind of thing. I actually weirdly wanted to be a teacher at one point and realised that definitely wasn't for me.
Sorry for all the teachers that were mildly offended by Paul's snide laugh at that comment.
They will empathise. They will empathize.
Yeah.
I actually had a conversation with a teacher the other day who has left her 10-year career through burnout. I do enjoy sort of imparting knowledge onto the next. But yeah, I've always kind of come from a performance background. People often think, I'm quite extroverted in the way I come across. I'm quite naturally confident. I've built that muscle up from a young age. And then I kind of had a couple of mediocre jobs, corporate jobs, just to pay the bills. But that was all while trying to actually make it in the music industry and what have you. So, but then I went into performance marketing. So set up a business with my co-founder, which was The Growth Guys, and still running to this day. So performance has been like the through line constantly throughout my life. It's one of those things that everything is related to performance in some way. And often when I talk about performance, people often misunderstand me when they think of acting, they think of fakery, they think of masking and all those kinds of things. And, once we talk about it, they kind of come away understanding it a little bit more. For me, performance is the series of actions you have to do to achieve an objective. And that is in everyday life. Everything you're doing, what we're doing now is a performance. What we do at home is a performance. A sales call, a pitch, a telephone call, a meeting with friends. It's all a performance. It's just different varying levels of performance. You don't script your responses to your friends. Likewise, in a sales call, you might script your responses to a prospect. So there's scripting, there's improvisation. It's all part of performance.
So just say that definition one more time for me.
So the performance is a series of actions to achieve an objective.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that if you're not trying to achieve a particular objective, then you're not performing?
You're always achieving an objective, either consciously or subconsciously. You're always achieving an objective. So, for instance, a meeting with a friend, the objective is to make them laugh, to make them feel comfortable, to make them understand your story, to make them empathize. There's always an objective, whether we like it or not. Why do we go for beers with friends? It's to make us feel good. It's to make us feel wanted and connected. They're all objectives, whether we know it or not.
So you could say that like your objective by spending time with your partner, for example, is to get needs met in the sense of like connection or significance or whatever that need is, right? But you're not doing that consciously.
You're not doing it consciously. You're doing it consistently, subconsciously. When we bring it to the fore, when we do it intentionally, that's when actually objectives become harder. Weirdly enough, they become harder because they're right there and they mean more potentially in that moment. So for instance, if we're on a sales call with a prospect, we have an objective to try and convert that into a sale. And a lot of the time, people don't know the series of actions that they have to follow in order to achieve that. And they're trying to sort of skip between varying things, varying actions to try and convert that. And that's why a lot of people, I think, don't like sales, or they say, I don't do sales. And it's purely because they just don't know the actions they have to go through to achieve the objective.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And so one could argue that life is a performance. If we are always trying to achieve objectives and performance is about a series of actions towards an objective, then everything we do in life is a performance.
I 100% agree.
Okay. It's interesting because when I think of performance, I think of a conscious choice and a conscious set of actions. Like I am performing it's interesting. Even as I'm saying this, like sometimes when you read a manual, it's like you perform the set of tasks in this particular way. Like you perform these tasks in order to get this thing. That's like the instruction. And they often use that word perform, right? You must perform these tasks in this particular order. But interestingly, when I think about performance, I think about acting and dancing, and I think of something which is calculated and thought out versus something that just happens naturally. But you're saying that performance is those actions, whether conscious or subconscious, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly, I mean, you've summed it up really, really nicely there, actually, because this is still a concept I'm working with, and it's constantly moving and breathing.
In the post.
Yeah, this is why you do what you do, mate. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree with it, and that's really nicely summed up. I think performance, the actual word performance, is in a lot of things, and like you've said there, like a manual. It's why we have performance KPIs. And, it's why if you don't hit certain KPIs, you might get put onto a performance improvement plan and those kinds of things. It's like, how do we improve performance? Well, we look at the performance review and we go, these are the set of actions that you have to do in order to, or these are the actions we've set out in order for you to achieve your objective. And the objective may or may not be achievable. Who knows? But in everyday life, we are performing. It's when we do bring it to more of a conscious level, that's when it becomes intentional. And that's where people then confuse it with being manipulative or contrived, or, it's, you can see it with a good performer and a bad performer. You've got, it's why they use the term bad actors, right?
You can tell they're acting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's when it becomes acting, it becomes inauthentic. But performance can be authentic. It can absolutely, and as much as it might be a bit of a sort of contradiction in terms, authentic performance is ultimately what we're trying to achieve. And when I'm looking at authentic performance, I'm thinking about what are the authentic parts of me that I need to bring, for instance, this podcast interview. What are the authentic parts of me I need to bring to this conversation? I'm curating myself. Okay? It's not like I'm creating myself, I'm curating myself. So I'm bringing the parts of me, the story I told you about the mediocre jobs, the wanting to be a teacher. They're the elements and the stories that are authentic to me that I'm bringing to this conversation in order to achieve the objective of telling the story to your audience, to try and emphasize the point of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's the objective.
So authentic performance is ultimately what we're aiming for. And don't get me wrong, it's a hugely bundled term. It needs breaking down. There are things in there that people need to work on. Not everybody is the perfect, authentic performer, but it can be done. There are steps to doing that. But I think once we just have the realization and then reframe it as authentic performance, things become a little bit more intentional. They become a little easier. And I'm not saying you have to consciously do this in every part of your life, because that's not possible. It's more around how can we be authentically performing in the areas that matter or need it.
I'm wondering how much of this is a distinction between consciously competent and unconsciously competent.
That's an interesting concept, yeah.
Because ultimately what we're talking about is that journey, right? It's like where you say in sales, right? So I remember we have a common friend, Daniel Priestley, and I remember joining one of Daniel's programs thinking that I was quite good at sales. And so I entered into this world where I was basically unconsciously incompetent. Like I didn't know what I didn't know. And then I listened to Daniel talk about sales and I thought, well, this is a guy that's built multiple 7-figure businesses and he's saying this is how we sell. And that's not how I sell. And so all of a sudden I became consciously incompetent. I realized that I wasn't actually that good at sales. So then I went from my natural selling, what that was, like having a conversation to achieve the objective of getting a client, which was probably very a natural performance, but it wasn't that effective. And then I met somebody who had a better way, a better performance of getting a result more effectively. And he said, well, you should do this. But in order to do the way that he was suggesting, I first had to learn that way. And so then I was unconsciously competent until I learned that skill. And then I became consciously competent. But it probably felt like a performance because I hadn't learnt it to the point where I had actually internalized it or done the reps, as Hormozy talks about a lot, right? It's like I haven't actually done this enough in order for it to become second nature or to become unconsciously competent, which is when we say I'm an authentic salesperson. Like I'm just myself. I don't have to think about it. I'm not thinking about my body language or my tone or whatever. It's just working. But it's working because I've done it so many times and I've learned so much from each one of those mistakes, and I've made a gradual improvement and a gradual thing. And then I go, oh, I know when that person says I need some time to think about it, I just ask that next question, and I know what that question is that I'm asking straight away, and I don't need to think, crap, what shall I say to this objection?
Yeah. I honestly, I was very similar actually when I was doing Daniel's program. What's really interesting about that is with any kind of sales training or any kind of training, if you bring it back to performers, actually, they have a script, they have a framework. And I don't know if you there's a channel on Instagram that I follow, and it's quite interesting, and it's like a multicam view, and at the bottom it has the rolling script. And at the top, it has the movie that it's from and how that's being played out. And quite often, it'll be someone like Daniel Day-Lewis and how he's done, There Will Be Blood, played the character in There Will Be Blood. And you'll see the script rolling, but you'll see his performance is not exactly like the script. He's ad-libbed a little here, or he's emphasized something here, or he's added a few little words in, or he's embellished a certain line. And it's like, that's what good performers do. They make it their own. So you've got the script, you've got the framework. And I know, not a lot of people will know this, but anybody who's been through Daniel's program or sales training will know that there is a bit at the beginning which is probably one of the most important bits, and it's building rapport. Building rapport is incredibly important, and actually it's very, very hard to do if you're not likable. And how do you find common ground to create that rapport with that person? And it's how quickly can you get to there? And I think you're quite good because you're naturally a good interviewer. And I'd like to think I'm good at it because I'm quite good at doing that thing, and I'm thinking about it as well. But you have that rapport bit, and that is ultimately kind of like what I'm thinking about right now. That you can have the frameworks, but ultimately the rapport bit is how do we create connection and resonance? How do we create that connection in the immediately to find that common ground, and how quickly can we get there? And this is ultimately what visibility is about for me. Coming right back to it, is visibility. People don't just buy from people they know, like, and trust anymore. I think trust is something that is very, very important, clearly. But I think it's one of those that people just need a little bit more. They need a little bit more, and they need believability. They need to believe you, because there's a lot of antitrust elements out there with AI, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But, people buy from people they know, like, and trust, but they need to believe in you. And that will come from rapport, that will come from authentic performance, and that will come from proof and all those kinds of things that go with that. But yeah, ultimately, that's kind of visibility is the first marker for me. If you're not visible, everything else doesn't count.
So the question I have for you then is, how does performance tie into your mission at the start of getting experts to be more visible?
I think because they need to realize that what they're doing is a performance. Because a lot of the pushback I get around experts wanting to or not wanting to be visible. So when I say, you're an expert, you need to be visible, you need to create visibility for yourself and your business. It's your obligation. It is the job nowadays. They go, oh, well, I'm just not confident enough. Or I don't like being on camera, or I don't like speaking in front of people, or I don't like doing sales, all these things they tell themselves. And when I reframe it as, you've just got to think of it as a bit of a performance. Everyone's doing it. Everyone has a performative element to what they're doing. You need to kind of come out of yourself a little bit and just realize that this is a job to be done. There's a set of actions that need to be done to achieve an objective. Visibility is one of them, but visibility is a hugely bundled term, and confidence is a big thing. Now, for me, there's two types of confidence. There's situational confidence, and then there's evidential confidence. Situational confidence might as well be renamed courage. Courage, essentially, to do the thing. So we need a situational confidence. And again, performers do this really, really well. They might visualize, they might run the scenario through their head. They might go, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And it's weirdly something that people with social anxiety are very, very good at. So people who have social anxiety often need to know who is in the room, who am I going to speak to first, what am I going to say, what can we talk about, is it the weather, their dog, the wife, or whatever. I need a set of things, almost like mental cues to go through. So situational confidence is at the beginning before you do something, and courage is a big part of that. Then on the other side of it, evidential confidence is essentially the thing that you get, the intangible thing that you get inside of you, that feeling you get when you've done something 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. And that is like anybody who goes to the gym for the first time doesn't know how to properly lift a barbell. But once you're taught the technique, once you know how to arch your back, or once you know where to put your legs, your arms, the posture you have, and you do it 20, 30, 40 times, multiple sets, multiple reps, you become confident that the next time you go into the gym, all right, I know what I'm doing, and you do it instinctively. That's situational confidence. And that's all that means. It's not, confidence should not be confused with charisma. Charisma is completely a different thing. That's personality.
What makes you say that situational confidence requires courage?
Bravery. Just the, someone I admire quite a lot, Dr. Ken Robinson, who unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but I really loved when he compares it to kids. And he talks about creativity and confidence, and he compares it to kids. Kids are just unafraid. They'll give anything a go. And we almost need that sort of like childlike courage to give something a go. It's only when those things become like unlearned as we become adults, and we become suppressed by judgment, fear of looking silly, all those different judgments that we have, all those different fears that we have. We just need the courage to give it a go. Go and do it. Be shit at something.
So is situational confidence almost like the confidence to know that in whatever situation you're going into, you will be okay?
Yeah, you're not going to die. Yeah. I mean, there are things. There are things.
You won't know about it, so it'll be fine. You don't have to worry.
Yeah, I mean, there are situations that you might not want to put yourself into.
But like in the example of walking into the room and not knowing anyone, or like the thing that a lot of, I think, creatives struggle with, this idea of networking, right? Going into the room and kind of having to pitch yourself and whatever. So situational confidence is like, well, I haven't been to many events before. I haven't done much networking. And so it's a level of confidence where I know I can talk to people. So worst case scenario, I might feel a bit awkward or not really know anyone, but I know I'll be okay because I can talk to people. Evidential confidence is where like you're part of BNI and you go to the same networking group every single week, and you can pretty much predict the outcome and who's going to say what and who's going to be there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the thing that you've done 1,000 times before.
Right. Okay. And just for listeners, like, what do you actually do? What is your business about? Because you talked about your personal mission at the beginning, but like, how does that tie into what your business does today?
The Growth Guys is a performance media, performance marketing business where we work with creative and media buying to help grow businesses. So yeah, we've got the creative element and we've got the media buying element, and the two are very much and very heavily linked. And then I've got a tech business as well called Social Pitch, which is essentially kind of what we're talking about in terms of the personal mission with regards to visibility. It's a tool that allows experts to become an authority and create visibility using their voice authentically, and it'll create essentially content for you so that you can become visible without the time sink, without the hours and hours of curating those kind of posts. But with the Growth Guys, we've been doing that obviously quite a while now, and there's been multiple changes over the years. We were just purely media buying. We didn't really dip our toe into the creative world in terms of actually creating those creative assets, because there were a lot of people who could do that very, very well. Unfortunately, November 2022 changed that with AI. And the creative barrier has just gone pretty much to zero.
And so where do you think this landscape is going? Because you talk about visibility and being visible online, but then you also just talked about using AI to help people do that. But then there's also this like AI slop that people are talking about that exists. So I guess first question is like, where do you think the future lies in terms of visibility for, let's say, creators?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, for me, I think there's just going to be a huge gulf. I mean, if we think about what the impact of AI is going to be economically, we think that basically it's going to wipe out the middle class. That's quite a well sort of shared view. I see something similar happening with creatives and a lot of other industries as well, not just creatives, but creatives specifically. I see a lot of the middle ground being wiped out. So I think, people like yourself, Chris Do, some really, really high-end creative people who have intellectual property, methods, experience behind them, they're going to be fine. Because people will want to work with experts. People will want to work with people or even just consume the content of those people. People at the bottom, they're going to be people who will still do things for time. Even though the creation level has kind of gone to zero, and anybody with a bit of taste and a bit of sort of creative thinking and critical thinking can create some pretty decent assets that would have cost you thousands of pounds, pre-2022.
So those bottom people are going to be using AI to create it, and they're not going to have much skill because the skill gap has basically shrunk. You can go from idea to amazing creative asset now.
Yeah, pretty much. I think the difference is going to be more the human elements. It's going to be taste.
It's going to be taste.
It's going to be interpretation.
Yeah. Taste and curation. Yeah. Okay. And then you think the middle ground. So how would you define the middle ground?
Creative agencies, ones that have kind of like bloated overheads. I'd say people who are potentially churning out packs of creative. I think we're either going to see some really good commoditized creative companies, or people who do this as a service, I think are really going to struggle. Unless your journey is incredibly tight and it's well thought out and it takes people on a very, very experiential journey. When you say journey, what do you mean? If you take people through a transformation, for instance, like I think branding experts particularly, if you're just someone who says, I will create you a brand, and that all that means is a logo and a color palette and some nice fonts, you're done. Like, you're done unless you change. But someone I work with, a woman called Jade, she has a very well thought out experience that she takes people through, and it makes people feel a part of it, and like it's coming from them, and all she's doing is drawing out the best bits of that business and stuff that they might not have even thought about. But if that person or someone else who wasn't taking them through a journey was to just go, I'll just do this on Canva or Adobe or whatever, and I'll just interpret what I think you need. There's no journey there. But so I think it's going to be very factious. I think you're going to see the creative industry become even more factious. You're going to have incredible experts, like you see it with the Diary of a CEO, those kinds of channels. You're going to have people who just have agencies, or they just deal with podcast trailers. That's all they do, because they know how to hook, they know how to keep attention just for the 30 seconds they've created a trailer for. You're going to have thumbnail experts, which you already kind of do. You're going to have people who just work on YouTube retention, as a creator. And, it's going to be incredibly factious, and this is why being an expert, we talk about niches, sub-niches. I think you're either going to have to be someone like Chris Do, who is pretty, he's a pretty sort of like expert generalist, or you're going to have the expertise in a very, very sort of minute niche, but with severe impact, like massive impact. So your thesis essentially is that unless you're visible, you will be swept up and potentially, I guess, swept to the bottom, where you're kind of scrambling to use AI tools to make the creative work? Or where do you think people are going to go who just don't master this skill of visibility? It's going to be a slow decline. I don't think it's going to be immediately seen. I don't think it's going to be something that you will immediately experience. I think it will be a slow decline over the next 12 to 24 months. Well, I'm already seeing like these people who you described who just sell branding, and their idea of branding, like you said, is a brand guideline, a color palette, some logos, stationery headers, etc. Like I'm already seeing those people feel the pinch, because
I think what AI is teaching us is that if you're just a worker, like you just have the solution to a problem that a business has, that AI also has a solution to, then like there's almost no competition. And I've been saying this to people for so long, even before AI, the fact that we live in this global economy means that somebody can literally acquire the same skill set as you. If we're just looking at pure skill set, like your ability to design a good, which is objective anyway, logo for somebody and choose the right color palette and create some kind of brand guidelines, like the skill that you've learned to be able to do that from a design perspective can be learned by somebody else in a developing world country, which means that they can do it for a third of the price that you can. So other than communication, really, there aren't many other variables that you can move there. So you have to be able to zoom out and look at like, what problem am I actually solving? And more importantly, how do I solve that? And like you said, is there some kind of journey where I can demonstrate that I can take you from where you are now to where you want to be? And my ability to do that removes some of the things that are really frustrating for you right now and gets you towards more of the things that you actually want without you having figured out the entire jigsaw piece, right? Because I think once clients have got to that point where they say, I just need an animation, like I've got this really cool product and I need someone to animate it for me, you're already at stage 4 of that kind of like decision-making process where they're being like, how quickly can I get this thing done? How much do I really have to pay to get it done? And is it going to look professional? And if it checks those 3 boxes, like I'm going with you because I've diagnosed my own problem and I know exactly what the solution is. So there's no like tangible value that you're delivering other than that creative, right?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, you look at the UK generally, we are a service economy. You know, there's not really much, like if you think about accountants, there's not really much between them all. They all offer similar services that are itemized on a menu pretty much. Do you need bookkeeping, VAT returns, etc., etc.? The ones that stand out are the ones that have something about them. They have a person that is kind of leading the charge and going, this is how we believe we work as an accountant. This is everything we believe in. We specialize for this particular industry. We know it inside out. This is where I've come from. You know, once you start seeing the business become more visible, and it's certainly human led, and they can take you through their worldview or their thoughts and their insights, it's basically the social media game again. It's when social media became a thing. Now we've just piled AI into it. Now everybody is a creator or has the ability to be a creator. Not everybody should be a creator. You know, it's because some people, it's just like one of those things that it just emphasizes kind of almost who you are, and you need to be able to use it and curate it. So to add AI into the whole thing, and ultimately you've got incredible amounts of slop going out there, you need to kind of be putting your face out there now. I think the days of, you know, and again, I guess it's kind of like what Daniel was talking about with KPI. It's like, I'm kind of almost thinking a little bit sort of sidestep of that. It's like, actually, I think your face needs to be out there. I think your face humans instinctively are attracted to faces rather than logos, right? That we need faces, we need voices, we need opinions. And I think when people express their own voice, that becomes attractive too. You know, so it's understanding, you know, how do they talk? Can they convince me? A lot of the convincing, and it's like the whole sort of triangle of communication, you know, it's 7% of what you say matters. The rest of it is tone and words. Yeah.
Yeah. What I've been thinking about recently, which I find quite interesting, is this idea that there used to be a barrier to entry, right? And for a while, we celebrated the fact that there wasn't. So if you wanted to be a famous musician, you had to be signed by a record label. You had to have a creative's kind of sign off. The A&R guy had to come and discover you at a gig and decide that you were worthy of investing in. And musicians hated that because it was like the man, you know, like, oh, the man decides whether like we get famous or not. Then that changed with things like Spotify. And now it's got to the point where anyone basically with a phone can create. They can create music, they can create written content, they can create images or whatever. So now there is no one deciding apart from the market. But I think the problem with that is now everybody has a voice is just so noisy, and you're just like, well, there's no one curating for me. And so I kind of have to curate for myself. And maybe I'm not actually a very good curator. I think part of like the beauty of the world we lived in where somebody was curating for us was usually that person was the head of A&R at Sony, because they were really fucking good at finding artists and finding up and coming artists and hearing that's the new sound. You know, it was the Arctic Monkeys. That's the new sound. I've got an ear for that, and I know that's going to resonate in a certain way. And so it was almost like we were fed our art and our culture, and it kind of meant that we didn't have to put in as much effort ourselves. That's what those people were designed to do. Now we have to curate everything ourselves, and like curation within its own right is a full-time job. That's why A&R people get paid a lot of money, because they have to sift through a lot of crap. They have to listen to hundreds of demos every single week to try and find the one or two artists that might just break through. And even out of those, there's probably only one or two of the ones that actually go all the way through that make it. So what are your thoughts on this idea of visibility in a very visible world?
I love those examples actually of like Spotify and, you know, curation, because if you think about it, like the curation can actually be done for you. You know, there are, if you go into your Spotify, there's playlists.
Yeah, that's true.
That are created for you based on what you've listened to before or what they think you might like. And you go into your favorite artist and you can listen to that artist's radio and things like that. And things are getting incredibly hyper personalized. Everything is becoming hyper something. You know, we are moving in a hyper world. Everything's much faster paced, but I think the jobs are going to change. Like your A&R guy from Sony Records is potentially going to be your personal brand manager. You know, do you know what I mean? It might be someone like, how do we make you look on the outside? You know, that kind of thing. Or how do we draw out the best bits of you to create an angle for this marketing campaign or whatever it might be. I think there will always be a little bit of external curation. I think it'll just look slightly differently to us.
Yeah, well, at the moment, the idea is the curation is the technology platforms, right? So Instagram is supposed to curate for us, LinkedIn is supposed to curate for us, etc. You use Spotify as an example. I think Spotify actually do a pretty good job of this.
Yeah, definitely.
It looks like at the moment people aren't very happy with the way, for example, LinkedIn are doing a job of this. Like it seems like LinkedIn isn't actually very good at curation, and maybe LinkedIn just doesn't actually have very good taste. So we are technically still at the mercy of someone. It's just an algorithm, not a person. And so we talked a little bit about AI earlier, and you were telling me about this kind of technology, I guess, that you're developing. So can you share your thoughts on how you think AI is currently and is going to play into people's ability to get seen by the right people and build that trust?
I think AI is the ultimate amplifier. Social media was an amplifier. Now you add a subwoofer at the back of it, you know, and that's AI. It's a gigantic amplifier in terms of everything that you do, which makes it more important. You can't beat the algorithms. You can hack them. You can hack them momentarily, but the algorithms will change, and therefore, you know, you're kind of left behind. The only thing that you can do is be yourself. So this is why Social Pitch exists, because it's ultimately turning your voice into visibility. You know, you interview yourself, you answer some questions, you do whatever you need to, and then the tool basically repurposes and releases that for you. So we run on the R3 system, which is record, repurpose, release. The repurpose, you know, if we can take an interview, that idea of chopping up an individual interview and turning it into 45, 50 pieces of content, which is not an exaggeration. That's exactly what the tool does. You know, one 15-minute interview can be a month's worth of content in less than 20 minutes. So, but it's using your voice as the stimulus, your thoughts, your ideas. That is ultimately what's going to differentiate you. The AI world is actually emphasizing the humanity even more. We need to be more human. We need to have thoughts and ideas. It doesn't matter if they've all been done before. They're your views. You need to express those views.
How long do you think it's going to be before consumers start to get consumption fatigue?
That's a difficult question to answer because I immediately think of it as like a drug. And I think it's addictive. And it's one of those that consumption is addictive. You know, it's that idea. I mean, I don't know about you. I still occasionally consume quite a bit of content on my phone when I'm trying to, you know, it's just a bad habit. But it's one of those things that you can start with all good intentions of doing it for a few minutes while the kettle boils, and then all of a sudden the kettle's gone cold and you've been doing that for half an hour. And it's incredibly addictive. So I don't know if there will be a fatigue as such. I think people will become more and more addicted. I do worry about that side of things, but I think that's down to the individual. I think that's ultimately down to the individual and how they believe they kind of want to act with that. But in terms of fatigue, I honestly don't know.
No, I just definitely find my brain feeling taxed because I think we only have the capacity to hold a certain amount of ideas and juxtapositions. And I think maybe one of the reasons that religion has been so popular for so long is it allows you just to hold one set of beliefs and one set of values and one rule book, right? The 10 commandments. There's only 10 of them. You can't forget them. Whereas like even the same kind of content. So if I think about something like the Diary of a CEO, if you go back and you listen to the last 25, 30 episodes, there's at least 10 contradicting viewpoints on that podcast. And I know he does that intentionally to try and give people a broad spectrum of ideas. But I also worry that like we don't have the capacity to deal with infinite possibilities and infinite information. I think it creates a level of uncertainty. And so for me recently, I'm kind of finding the solution to that to be tuning out of the noise and not consuming as much and trying to really tune into what I believe and what I think the world needs. And I wonder how many other people like me who have busy minds are starting to deal with mass consumption in the same way.
Yeah, I think there's a few things at play there, though, isn't there? I think you're clearly hugely self-aware. You're self-aware of what you're doing. You don't need that external cue to go, whoa, Matt, stop scrolling. Like, this is ridiculous. You're aware that you're doing that, and that's because you're hyper-vigilant of your own actions. Most people are not. If you look at the people around you, like I had this really scary thing happen to me the other day, and it might not be scary to everyone else, but I was walking the dog early in the morning, and I say early, it was around the sort of like kids going to school sort of time. I was just walking the dog down the street, and all of a sudden I saw about 4 or 5 sort of teenage, secondary level children just walk out of their driveways, you know, because the school bus was about to arrive. And they were all on their phone. They were all on their phone, hoods up, head down, phone out. And then I walked past and then ultimately saw the bus go by. And I looked in the bus and they were all the same, head down, scrolling on their phone. I was just like
zombies.
That was terrifying. Yeah, zombie apocalypse style. It was literally like watching a scene of Shaun of the Dead. It was like, and it was absolutely terrifying. And I thought, well, I'm aware of that. I wonder how many other people are looking at that and going, that's terrifying. Or if one kid on that bus is going, this is a bit weird. Why are we all doing this?
They're all like hypnotized.
Yeah, exactly. But they are hypnotized. That's exactly the right
Demon
word.
Headmaster.
Yeah.
Do you remember that show?
Yeah, we're showing our age with that now.
Yeah,
but, that's exactly how we think, and you know, we can observe from the outside, but they're not able to observe from the inside and go, this is mental. So I think, you know, you're incredibly self-aware. That's the first thing. I think the other thing as well is it depends on your agency. So it's like, are you low or high agency? And I listened to an incredible podcast recently that was talking about that. And you can actually get into these low agency traps that you think are high agency, but they're really not. Like, and I think it depends on whether or not you have the agency to go, I'm going to create more. I know what I need to do. This is a high agency task. It's going to have maximum impact and effect.
Do you think there is ultimately going to be, if you imagine like a pie chart, do you think there's always going to be a kind of 80-20 where like 20% of us are creating and 80% of us are consuming? Maybe not that in that exact ratio, but that's obviously a typical kind of Pareto principle. But like, do you think there's always going to be a percentage of people that just consume and just buy and just, they are consumers, they have maybe a job, or they have, I don't know, I just can't imagine like a business person or an entrepreneur not creating. Like you said, I think like not creating means you're not visible. If you're not visible, then you don't get clients. And then like, so is it just going to be like people consume, but they are typically people who are employed, and creators who run their own business create, and like that's the way the world is? Or I don't know, like how do you see it?
I think there's a couple of things with that. I do think more people will create. I'm confident that they will, and I would hope to see that. I do think we have quite a small time window though, in which that becomes, you have an opportunity. I think firstly, people need to understand that visibility is their job now. Like that is just part and parcel of what you need to do. If you're not doing things like this, if you're not creating content, if you're not expressing views, like if you're not doing those things in a professional environment, and I would say it kind of goes the other way as well. I would say like university students, people leaving school, they need to be thinking about how they become visible. I heard an awful stat the other day that graduation places or graduation placements post university has gone down from 1.4 million to 500,000.
Wow.
Those figures might need fact checking, but it was a significant drop. And that was to do with AI and to do with a lot of filtration systems regarding CVs and things. But then it's like, how are they creating their own professional persona to be job ready, to be work ready? How are people going to find you? So, sorry, quick aside on that one, but that's kind of how I think about it. More people will create. For sure, but I think there will be a large proportion of people who will. I think they will just fall behind. I heard Elon Musk call it a supersonic tsunami. Like it's not even a wave; it's a supersonic tsunami. The water is receding right now, and there are people who are already like on top of the wave. They're already aware of it. They're already running. I just don't think people fully know what's coming from the visibility point of view. Anyway, I think, just start making some moves, start being a little bit more visible, have the confidence to do so, put yourself into the position where you can do that. It's incredibly important.
You were talking about a tool before we hit record, which is related to the creative around media buying. And you were also saying to me the other day when we had a conversation that you're already seeing a lot of sort of freelancers and small agencies who have previously been tasked with the creative and all of that kind of being already shunned out by AI. Could you just first of all, I guess, explain a little bit more about how the tool works?
Yeah, so we actually wrote a white paper a little while ago, which was called the Creative MRI. And a lot of what we do at the Growth Guys is we use quite a lot of anatomical terms for what we do, because it best represents what we do. And so we create this Creative MRI, and it was essentially a snapshot of what makes a good creative piece. What makes a good piece of creative that will perform well within the performance marketing arena. So that's kind of what we did. So we looked at all these different things, all these different metrics like thumb stops ratio, like 3-second hooks, placements, all the different things, click-through rates, everything. And we brought it all together in a spreadsheet, and we've been using that internally with our clients. And what we actually found was that AI created creative, which we call performance creative, because it's obviously used in performance marketing, was outperforming that was created by a person. And it was really crazy, because we're still kind of doing the work on it and understanding why that is. And the tool that we've built, and the spreadsheet that we've built that we hope to turn into a tool will help decipher that a little bit more. But what it does do is it gives us two and we've checked this against attribution tools as well, to around a 95% accuracy. And it's always difficult with creative, because creative is very subjective. But if we're using that data to a 95% accuracy, we can go, this worked, this is why it worked. Let's go and create more of those and test them out with different creative entity IDs. And that's the other thing to mention at this point, I think, actually, for anybody who is in the creative sector that does create creative for agencies or media buyers or brands. Meta just dropped the biggest creative update we've ever seen, which is the Andromeda update. And it's basically changing the way that people will do ads moving forward.
Do you think that's to anticipate OpenAI bringing in ads?
No, I don't think so. I think it will be a small factor, but if you think about the way people use OpenAI or ChatGPT specifically, it's probably more for a hyper-personalized search. Where if we think about something like Meta, it's very much we often think of it as two sides of the coin. So we've got be found and go find. Meta is very much a go find kind of platform. Place your product in front of people and hope that they are product and solution aware. Whereas with AI, with ChatGPT specifically, and Perplexity and things like that, they are looking to find an answer. So and then you can have the opportunity to be found on that platform. So and that's why we're talking about AIO, GEO, all these different acronyms for AI generative search. But yeah, Meta from a creative standpoint, and I guess it's going to affect probably ecom brands more so than anybody else. The creative literally is the targeting now. And you can use AI, because ultimately that is where Meta is going. They want to basically democratize advertising. That's what they're saying. But ultimately you will be able to upload your product, tell the AI who you want to sell it to and for how much and for what profit margin, and it will just go away and create the creative and find the sales. That's ultimately where Meta is going.
Based on thousands of data points of what's worked in the past.
Around 50,000 data points. Compounded over, since 2007.
So can you give us an example of where the AI outperformed human creative?
It was around context. For instance, we have a cosmetics brand, I guess you could call them. They do soaps as well and perfumes and things as well. But they had a quite a bog standard product shoot and created some lovely images of the product, but it was lacking context. We uploaded that into various different sort of AI bits of software, Sora 2 being one of them, Artlist, Geo3, have a look at these different tools. And we just gave it some creative direction. That's all we did, is just a bit of creative direction. And what the output was, for instance, I'll give you a really tangible example. There was a perfume that was basically Sicilian lemon flavored. It had a Sicilian lemon scent. All it had was the product bottle with a couple of lemons either side. That was the original image. The actual image it created, it put that bottle into a Sicilian lemon grove background, and it looked hyper realistic. It gave it ultimately a 3D context. And it's not hard to do this kind of thing. But what is hard to do is to have creative direction. To have that taste, to know how to think with a product. That's the hard bit. The actual prompting of the tools, not hard at all. But the ability to know that you needed to go and test that, and you can create multiple iterations of that, which in the Andromeda update is technically one creative entity ID. You can create multiple versions of that. It's the same image, but it's multiple versions of it. And it outstripped, in terms of return on ad spend, it more than tripled it, which was mad, absolutely mad. And we've done that. We thought that was a fluke. So we did it again and again and again. And it's working pretty much 90% of the time.
And so where does that leave creatives such as photographers, 3D animators, designers?
It comes back to what you said before as to whether or not you're a worker or not. If you are someone with good creative thinking, if you have good taste, if you can almost see a vision for the product that the brand owner or the internal brand manager can't see, if you can be that source of incredible creative thinking, then that's where you're going to win.
Surely it's going to get to a point though, like, because you just said about this update, surely it's going to get to a point where, like, why would someone, a media buyer or a CMO, decide to experiment with someone who maybe has a good track record of, I don't know, you could say media buying, or let's say creative direction, right? Let's say they're a creative director, they have a good portfolio, a good CV. Why would I pay that creative director multiple 5 figures to come in and come up with a campaign when I can upload the product or the product shots to Meta and let Meta do its thing behind the scenes to find the most optimal creative ad set?
Firstly, we're not there yet, So, it's definitely a discipline to start working on now. But even when it does come, this update, when it eventually gets here, and things still might change, but when the update eventually does come, people are still going to be time poor. I presume, I don't know for sure, but people are still going to be time poor, and they'll still just want someone to do something for them. The business owner might want to kick back or whatever, but I think there'll always be a need for creative thinking. But that's what I worry about with AI is people outsourcing their creative thinking. Outsource the actual work, sure, but the creative thinking, the actual bit that I don't know if you remember, but like 5 years ago, like if you tried to sell thinking as part of your proposal to a client, they more often than not, they laughed you out of the room. It's like, what? I'm paying you to think. Yeah, damn right you are. Yeah, we need to go away and we need to hypothesize. We need to come up with some creative concepts. But if you actually charged for that thinking and shaping piece, more often than not, you got laughed out of the room. Certainly at mid to low level budgets. High level budgets, they understood it. But I think that's kind of like why the work of someone like Rory Sutherland is incredibly important, because actually it is alchemy. It is it's a little bit of alchemy of what we're doing as creatives and as performance marketers and as marketers in general. We do need to have an element of alchemy about what we do, because sometimes it's not the most logical. The AI only really knows what has gone before it, not what could come after it. So it's, we almost need to be a little bit more out of the box, a little bit more forward thinking. So there's still hope. There's still hope is what I'm saying. I don't want this all to be doom and gloom. I think if you have a great creative mind, a great creative thinking process, I think the world could be your oyster moving, in the very near future.
I love that. I think that's a great place to end this conversation. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about or that you haven't said that you think is important for creatives, business owners to hear?
I think I would just end on the note that, there are a lot of people making predictions. There are a lot of people who are putting their 10 cents out there, and some of them are going to hit it right. Some of them are going to be wildly wrong. Ultimately, no one really knows what's going to happen ultimately. But we're all doing our best to sort of shape it as we see it to be true. That's the best we possibly can do. I think with things like visibility, I think it's just good common sense. Like, it's just common sense to want to be visible for the people that potentially need what you do. Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? And I might be biased towards my own thinking there, but it's been it's a rising trend. The creator economy generally is going to rise like 5x in the next 2 or 3 years. It does make sense, but ultimately think about how you are as a consumer and who you listen to, and then look at what it is you're actually doing there. You're watching someone express their views. So be a part of the conversation, I guess, is what I would say. And yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting time for people who are creative with high agency. I think the world is going to be a very abundant place for those people. People who aren't that creative or are outsourcing their creative thinking and are not very high agency, I'd potentially look at upskilling or sort of turn it around.
Love that. Paul, if people want to connect with you, find out more about you, follow your thinking, where is the best place for them to get hold of you on the interweb?
Yeah, I mainly hang out on LinkedIn. So it's just Paul-A-Fernandez. Unfortunately, there's apparently a lot of Mexican footballers with my name. So yeah, I hang out on LinkedIn. But if you type in Paul Fernandez or the Growth Guys to Google, you can usually find me there. So, and I have a podcast as well, which is the Mastering Business Growth podcast. It's had some great chats so far, and there's some great content on there as well. But yeah, mainly LinkedIn to find me.
Love it. Paul, thank you so much for being a guest on the Creative Courage podcast.
Cheers, Matt. Really appreciate it. That was a good one. I really enjoyed that. You're a great host. Thanks, man.
Thanks, dude.